Hello, this is Aline Fader. I'm the Zoning Project Coordinator for the National Zoning Atlas, and today we're going to talk about Planned Residential Developments, or PRDs. Hopefully, this will give you an overview so that you as a zoning analyst know what to enter and how to enter it into our new editor tool. Our agenda today will help you to identify what a PRD is and how you enter data about them. But first, let's make sure we're all on the same page about what exactly is a PRD. A PRD is a type of development where a large number of housing units are built in accordance with a coordinated master plan. There can be flexibility with respect to grouping of the buildings, how they're placed on the site, their size, and even the uses within the buildings. PRD regulations are designed to accommodate types of development at a larger scale than just a single house on a small lot. They are designed to address density of structures within a larger parcel sometimes. The number of units per structure is often discussed, or the number of buildings per lot. They oftentimes are used to conserve natural resources, open space, that sort of thing. So they'll talk about how the site is, how the structures are grouped on the site. They'll talk about setbacks. They may be different from your regular setback regulations. It'll often have something around infrastructure, including how they connect to the larger street network. Are there driveways? How are those configured? And how pedestrian network or other things are accommodated within the site. PRDs can allow many residential units, often in different buildings, to be permitted at one time, and they're approved on large sites usually. It can be a really big lot, like a 10-acre lot, or it might be as part of a subdivision or a collection of smaller lots. Please note that subdivision alone is not qualification for a PRD. A PRD must have that element of a master plan. As a reminder, PRDs are not the only types of planned developments that you're likely to find in a zoning resolution. You may find ones that are intended to produce hospital campuses or industrial parks. These will often be called planned developments, planned industrial developments, planned community facility developments, something along those lines. Sometimes you'll have a commercial only one too. The ones that we track in the Atlas, however, are PRDs, emphasis on the R, and they are ones that include residential uses. So they are either mixed use ones, which have residential and other things, or they are just strictly residential ones. So how do you identify these when you're looking at them? A big giveaway to whether or not a district is a planned residential district is in the name. They'll usually be called planned residential district, planned residence district, planned unit district, planned or master plan district. You sometimes will see ones that are labeled active adult, 55 plus, elderly district, and any mobile home park district is oftentimes a PRD. These are almost always districts allowing only PRDs and usually therefore a primarily residential district. The other place to look for regulations that allow PRDs is in your regular zoning districts, not your PRD only districts. Oftentimes, a regular district will allow applications such as a special permit that, when approved, permit PRDs. The names of the applications are often a big giveaway that PRDs are allowed in a given district. Notice the names here are very similar to the common names of PRD-only districts. These uses may be listed in the district's regulations, so be sure to check the use tables to identify PRDs, where you may find things listed like cluster developments or mobile home parks. Also, don't forget to look for these in mixed-use districts as well as the residential-only ones, because they can be in either place. These applications can also appear in general regulations. This happens when a special permit may apply to more than one zoning district. You can also see if within one of these districts that allows mixed use or residential, whether housing is allowed to be developed pursuant to a master plan. And if it is, that means that there is PRD housing allowed in that district. Multiple residential buildings to be developed on a large lot with different criteria other than housing in the district is PRD housing. So for example, the district might allow 10-acre parcels to be developed with a mix of single-family and two-family housing. That is a PRD housing use. As a general reminder, there is this word floating that you will sometimes see tied to districts. Whether it's a PRD district or not, you should ignore this term at all times. Floating really doesn't mean anything in terms of anything reliable that you can assume about any district. It doesn't mean that it's mapped or not. It doesn't mean that it's an overlay. It doesn't mean mixed use. It doesn't mean PRD. It just is a generic word that is occasionally used in the text. You have to actually read the regulations of that district to identify whether or not it is an overlay. And you have to look at the map to see whether or not it is mapped or not. My assumption is that this term enters the text oftentimes when a zoning text is updated to include a new district, but that district is not intended to be mapped at that point in time. So they call it a floating district because it's not on the map. But you don't know when you pick up that text whether or not it has actually been mapped or not. So for that reason, you can make no assumption about it. Do not assume that it's unmapped because it's called floating. You have to check the map and you go by what's on the map. The map has that district, then it is mapped. So floating means nothing, ignore it, and just rely on the other words in the text. Just as an example, I wanted to show you a little snippet from the text for Dickinson, New York. And you can see here that in the purpose of the PRD district, it actually says some things that should resonate with our definition of a PRD. So first of all, it is called a planned unit development district. This is very similar to the search terms that we pointed out earlier. It talks about diverse uses. It talks about a compatible and unified plan of development. That smells like a master plan to me. And then it also mentions the greater flexibility. So these are all aspects that we're looking for in a district that might be a PRD district. Here's another one. This is from New York City. In this case, it's not a district. This is a special permit. But notice that it's large scale, so it's talking about a large area, several zoning lots, but planned as a unit. I'm starting to think master plan here, allowing greater flexibility for the purpose of securing better site planning. That really screams master plan to me. So these are the types of terminology. Like I said, you're not likely to see the actual definition that we offer, but that you're probably going to see terms that relate to it in a very direct way, like we're showing. Flexibility, notice, is a word that both used in their PRD regulations. So how do you enter this data into our editor? The first step in data entry for PRDs is to identify whether or not you're working with a PRD-only district. A PRD-only district is created for a specific site where a specific master plan development is built and no other type of development is permitted. The name is usually going to be the giveaway. You can see here a list of potential PRD-only districts from New York State. Notice they all have the word planned in the title. To identify whether or not these are PRD-only districts, the zoning analysts will likely need to confirm that residential uses are permitted in these planned developments and that all of the development in the district must be part of a master plan. Once you've established that you have this PRD-only district, you're going to determine whether the district as a whole is a residential-only one or a mixed-use one. Does it allow anything other than residential uses or things typically in a residential district? If the answer is yes, it'll be mixed use. And if it's no, it's a residential-only one. Enter the type of district entry accordingly. Then you're going to determine whether it's a base district or an overlay district. Overlays have rules that supplement but do not entirely override the regulations of the base district. So for example, if you have a PRD district, that has height regulations and setback regulations that come from an underlying district, then it is an overlay district. If it overwrites all of the rules that had previously been there when it is mapped, then it is not an overlay district, and you would enter the overlay entry accordingly. For the PRD district, you're going to want to determine whether it's mapped or unmapped. The only way to do this is to look at the map and see if you can see it on there. If it's not, it's unmapped, and you put the mapped entry into the editor accordingly. Here is a sample of a PRD-only district's zoning district details, so you can see how it might look when finished. You can see here that this planned unit development district is mapped because it has yes in the district mapped field. It is not mapped but extinct, and it is not an overlay. You can also see that it's mixed with residential, and it is not affordable housing district only, nor it is an elderly housing district only. PRD only districts, oftentimes if they are labeled as 55 plus or something along those lines, will occasionally be elderly housing only districts. So keep an eye out for those as you're looking at the data. At this point, you should have the basics of your district entered, whether it is a PRD only district or a district that allows PRD housing and something else. And then we are going to add in some characteristics to both the PRD section and to the housing treatment sections. So in the next slides, the fields that we're going to be talking about will apply both to PRD only districts and to districts that allow PRD housing and a bunch of other things. Before we get into the logistics of districts that do have PRD housing, if you have districts that do not allow PRD housing at all, or where you simply cannot find any PRD regulations, you can log the treatment for that section as not mentioned or as prohibited if it's specifically prohibited. You can see the example below. PRD regulations are not as straightforward always as some of your other regulations, so while most uses will appear in a nice chart or within a district regulation section of the zoning text, PRD language can appear in all sorts of places. Oftentimes you might find it in an administration section, general section, special regulations section of the zoning text, anywhere where you might find a special permit or other type of application. So be sure to check the text for the key terms that we mentioned at the beginning around plan development. Be sure that you enter PRD data for each district where PRDs are allowed, and to do that you need to check the full text. If you do see PRD housing located in a district, no matter where it is in the text, you're going to then determine whether it's allowed to be built without a public hearing or with a public hearing. If there is no public hearing required, then you're going to mark the treatment field as allowed/conditional. If there is a public hearing, then you put in public hearing. You are going to make sure that this is referring to the application for the whole PRD, not an individual housing unit that's built within it. So what is the approval process for the entirety of the PRD, not a housing unit that gets built after that approval. Then you're going to go into the entries for the different types of treatments for the different types of residential uses, the 1-family treatment, 2-family treatment, 3-family treatment, and 4+ family treatment. When you have a PRD only district, you are going to fill out the treatment fields in a particular way. After you have filled out your PRD treatment, which indicates whether the PRD is allowed conditional or public hearing, you are then going to go to each of the housing treatment fields and fill it out with the exact same information if they are permitted within that PRD. Since it is the only housing that is permitted, it must match the permitting process of the PRD. Anything that is not permitted within the PRD could be marked prohibited, and then anything that is should match. So in this instance, this PRD is allowed conditional, and therefore if 1-family housing is allowed within that district, then it also must be allowed/conditional. Please make sure again that you're only entering the approval for the planned residential development in the zoning text, not the type of approval for individual units that might be built within it. When you have a district that allows PRD and non-PRD housing, the way you approach the treatment fields is a little different. If the PRD treatment of a specific type of housing, for example a one-family home, is the same as a non-PRD one-family house, you are simply going to include that treatment in the treatment entry. So for example, your one-family home in the PRD is approved through a special permit, and your one-family home outside of a PRD is also approved through a special permit, and both require public hearings. You will enter public hearing in the treatment field for one-family homes. However, if the PRD treatment of one-family homes is different from the district's treatment of one-family homes, then you have to make sure to log the treatment of the non-PRD housing in the housing treatment section. We assume that they'll be more frequent than the PRD housing. In our early example, if you have one-family homes in the PRD that require a public hearing, and you have one-family homes outside of a PRD that do not require the public hearing, you would enter allowed/conditional in the one-family treatment field. You will then enter a note in the Visible Atlas notes to convey that the one-family housing in a PRD is only permitted by a public hearing. So to put this all together, what you're going to do is you're going to log a property owner's application for a PRD in the PRD treatment field. Do they need a public hearing, or is it allowed conditional? In a PRD only district, you're going to act as if PRD housing were normal housing. You're going to make no visible notes, and all the treatment fields will match the PRD treatment. In a district that allows PRD and non-PRD housing, if both approvals are the same, you're going to log the treatment once and you're going to make no visible notes. If they differ, one requires a public hearing and one does not, you're going to log the non-PRD approval type in the treatment field and make a visible note about the PRD approval type so that we know that there is a difference. If a district allows single-family housing as of right, but multifamily housing only in a PRD subject to public hearing, what you're going to do is you're going to mark allowed conditional for one family, public hearing for 4+, and public hearing for PRD. This is a pretty common occurrence. If you have the same type of housing but different permits, this is what you're going to do. So if it allows as of right single-family housing, but allows single-family and two-family housing pursuant to a special permit in a PRD, you are going to mark the one-family treatment as allowed conditional, the two-family treatment as public hearing, the PRD treatment as public hearing, and you're going to add a visible note that one family in PRDs is allowed after a public hearing. Sometimes you might have same housing but different requirements when you have PRD and non-PRD housing. In this instance, we have a multifamily housing on 4-acre lots and multifamily housing in a PRD on 2-acre lots. In this case, what we would do is mark the minimum lot size for 4+ family housing as an alternative and enter the text 4, or 2 if PRD. Just remember that when we put the PRD minimum lot size under the PRD treatment field, it is the minimum size required for the PRD application as a whole, not the minimum size required for individual housing types or buildings within that development. In this instance that we talked about, 2 if PRD is the size for the lot of a 4-family development within a PRD, and the PRD itself is likely going to be at least 2 acres, if not more, to accommodate multiple housing types. Similarly, housing of the same type within a district that allows PRDs and non-PRD housing may have some regulations for one type and none for another. In this example, a district allows single-family housing without a height cap and single-family housing in a PRD with a 30-foot height cap. What you'll do is mark the one-family maximum height as an alternatives and enter the text 30 if PRD. As a reminder, we don't write zeros or nulls into these fields. So when you see an entry like 30 if PRD, it is assumed that all other single-family homes outside of a PRD do not have a height maximum. If a district only allows housing in a PRD, whether it's a mixed-use district or a PRD-only district, then you're going to log lot and structure-related characteristics as if PRD housing were normal housing. In other words, there's no need to make visual notes or add in any text to explain the height limits, setbacks, etc. For example, if the PRD housing has a height cap of 40, you simply write 40 in the maximum height field. You don't need to say 40 if PRD. As a reminder, per the NZA methodology, mobile home parks or manufactured home parks are considered PRDs. And if you come across a district that is for mobile home parks, you should be sure to mark the PRD treatment accordingly and mark yes in the entry for mobile or manufactured home park under the PRD treatment field. Sometimes you might have a text that has multiple PRDs that can be used in a given district. You can have multiple PRDs for a number of reasons. Sometimes they specify ones that are just for residential use, some that are for mixed use, some for your mobile homes, some for elderly, and some for affordable housing. When your zoning district has multiple PRDs, you will expect to see different regulations for each one. To accommodate this, you should expect to use the alternatives option under Unit/Special in order to indicate the various alternatives for different PRDs. You can see in the sample here that we have a max lot coverage that for 3 different PRDs within a given zoning district. Also, note that with the treatment fields, you're going to use the most common process. So if you have multiple PRDs and they have different approval processes, you should pick the one that you expect to be built most commonly, and you put that in the PRD treatment field. In Big Flats in New York, there is a district called Town Center 2 that allows for 3 different types of planned developments. One is a mixed-use one is a strictly residential one, and one is an elderly residential one. Here we can see how these 3 PRDs are entered into the Town Center 2 zoning district. In the Planned Residential Development section, we entered public hearing into the treatment field. This was easy because they all had the same process for approval. If they had been different, we would have selected the one that was likely to be the most common, which usually will be the one that is easiest to get through. For the mobile or manufactured home park, we marked no because no mobile or manufactured home parks were permitted in any of these PRDs. For the minimum lot size, note that we used alternatives to accommodate the 2 different minimum lot sizes for these 3 PRDs, 5 for mixed use or residential PRDs and 3 for the elderly PRD. Maximum density was only mentioned in the residential or elderly PRD, and therefore we only entered 10 residential PRDs in the max density field. There's no need to mention anything about the mixed use because there simply was none. I want to point out here also the language that we used. While the name of the elderly district was SHPMRD, we did not call it that here. We use generic terms that are commonly used throughout the atlas so that people don't have to learn the specific jargon of each individual zoning text. Please be sure that you don't use specific acronyms that are only used in one zoning text and that you stick to terms that are easily identifiable by regular human beings. In Binghamton, New York, they have 3 what could be considered PRD districts, but if you look closely, the one that's actually called PRD is a recreational district and does not allow housing. So sometimes you will see misleading acronyms in the text. Be very careful of this because here the one that's actually called PRD is the only one that's not a PRD. When we enter districts into the editor, we should also check the maps. Here we see that Binghamton PDD district is mapped in a number of locations, reflecting approvals for a whole bunch of planned developments. But since this particular district allows all sorts of uses, there is no way for us to know if residential is a component of all of these planned developments. They could be industrial, businesses, community facility, residential, or a mix of uses. And they could also be a variety of different building forms. To address this, we will log all of these areas as one district and treat the district as if it is being newly applied for. Then we will add a visible atlas note to indicate that there is a lack of specificity in the regulations, but it could be used for residential, mixed-use, commercial, or industrial purposes. As a note, the master plans that guide development in each of these areas are not located in the zoning. This is extremely common. Those master plans are often recorded in legal documents or stored elsewhere. There is no need to go and seek those out and enter data specifically from those. This is one of my favorite zoning maps that I've seen so far. Here in Cary, North Carolina, you see these big blue areas either outlined in blue or in red, and they are all PRDs. There are over 60 that are mapped. They are each named separately on the map. That's what those two boxes in the map indicate as all their names. And there are two different categories of PRDs. That's why some are outlined in blue and some in red. The only difference between the two categories is the minimum lot size. And there are no specific design regulations, setbacks, heights, or anything like that for the PRDs. It's all decided through site plan review. So how did we log this one? Well, we logged it as one PRD district. All of these, both outlined in blue and red, are logged as one PRD district. We noted alternative minimum lot sizes, and we recorded the treatment fields as if they were applying for new PRDs, because each one of these PRDs, each one of these over 60 PRDs, could have different types of housing and different uses within them. But we won't know that from the zoning. I hope that this was helpful in entering your PRD data. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us on Slack or via email, and we're happy to provide further guidance. Thank you.